Hello, it's John Heaton here with another video, and today we thought we'd have a bit of a change of location, so we came downtown. That's the Budapest Parliament across the river there. I hope you can hear me above the sound of the traffic. This is the first time we've tried it, so today I'm going to be reviewing the Beatles album Let It Be, which I often think gets slightly lost in the mix. People always are praising Abbey Road and the White Album, and this was from the same period and is also a 5-star classic in my opinion. So this is the original album from 1970. Just before I go through the tracks, I'm going to discuss the other two versions of the album. First of all, it was intended to look like this and was going to be called Get Back, and then it got delayed by over a year, and eventually it ended up being called Let It Be. But this is interesting that they were going to use this cover, which you probably recognize because it was used on the Red and Blue compilations. But it's a classic picture, and I've got a soft spot for it myself, as it was taken on my 5th birthday on 13th of May 1969 by Angus McBean. So this is a bootleg, but you can see roughly how it would have looked. And then the other version is, of course, Let It Be Naked, which came out a few years ago, which is basically a stripped down version of this album without any of the orchestration or brass overdubs which Phil Spector put on the album. When this album first came out, I was pretty convinced that this was the definitive mixes and definitive album of Let It Be, but as someone pointed out in a review at the time, the original album is always going to have more longevity, and he turned out to be right, because when I go back to Let It Be these days, I normally return to this version. So I'm going to go through it. It opens with Two of Us, a classic McCartney song written when he and Linda just got back together. I love it to bits, and great harmonies from John and Paul. Great version of it in the Let It Be film. Incidentally, the Let It Be film, when is it going to get released on DVD? It's just ridiculous that it hasn't been released, isn't it? I think so. Someone should tell Paul and Ringo to get it out soon. They keep hearing rumours, but nothing happens. Dig a Pony is next up from John, and it's probably the only track on the album which is not a 5-star Beatle classic. It's a decent bluesy number, well performed, but not my favourite. Across the Universe. Good version of this, good version, and I like the strings from Phil Spector. I like what he's done with them. I think this is slightly slowed down versus the 68 original mix, but I think Phil Spector has used the original 68 recording and just slowed it down. But I like it, and John was pleased with this version as well. I'm in Mind, the first track from George. Actually, the version of this on the album was released on the 3rd of January 1970 by Paul, George and Ringo, without John, so it actually is the last Beatles session ever, apart from the following day when they did some overdubs onto the Let It Be song. So I'm in Mine is briefly seen in the movie, and it's a great George track, lovely waltz. Dig It, the original song lasted 7 or 8 minutes, far too long, so Phil Spector quite rightly shortened it to round about a minute, and it's much better. This is the back cover, by the way. And slightly mischievous programming from Phil Spector, because you hear John Lennon at the end of Dig It saying, that was Can You Dig It? Now we'd like to do Ark the Angels Come, and then they go into Let It Be. So I don't know if that was deliberate or not. I guess it probably was, either from Phil Spector or John Lennon, but it's quite amusing anyway, so I don't mind. The title track, Let It Be, there are two versions of this. The single, two guitar solos, both from George. The one on the single, he sounds a bit like an organ playing the guitar solo, and in this one he's a lot more aggressive with his solo, and I prefer it. And this was recorded on the 4th of January 1970, so it was indeed the last overdub onto a Beatles song. I think maybe Ringo did a percussion overdub in April of 1970, but it was the last proper overdub. It's a great solo. It's a great solo. I think this is the best Let It Be version. I love the way that Phil Spector's mixed up the drums on the last verse from Ringo. Some people don't like that, but I do. Maggie May, short song, amusing cover version. Good, nothing wrong with it. So, moving on to side 2 now. Starts off with, hope you can see me, it looks a bit dark. We're losing the light here. I've got a feeling, what a great opener from Paul. And I'll say on the bootleg version, which Glyn Johns did, the version is far inferior. There were even mistakes, but on this one, it's great, and the guitar is mixed very loud and very effectively. And a good version of this is in the movie. One After 909, this is actually from the rooftop concert, January 30th, 1969. Great song, actually dating from '63, and they went back to it, and it's nice vocal shared by John and Paul. And then we move on to The Long and Winding Road, where Phil Spector notoriously put all the choirs and the strings, much to the annoyance of Paul McCartney and George Martin. I don't mind it. I think it works. I think the naked version works. They both work for different reasons. Nothing wrong with it. For You Blue from George, great 12-bar blues number. Great version of this in the film. And actually thinking about it now, he did overdub the vocal in January 1970. So, because the Glyn Johns version had a different vocal. Finishes off with Get Back, and this version is far superior to the single, which was produced by George Martin. Phil Spector's really stomped it up. The guitars are mixed louder, the drums are mixed louder. It's just a heavier version. Very noticeable difference. And great ending, of course, at the end with John saying, I hope we pass the audition. So this version is a UK version, but it's got the US in a sleeve, which I've managed to pick up. And it's on the green apple. I think the US version was on the red apple. And I've also got the poster that came with it, although it's sadly falling to bits, so I'm not going to open it up. And the other, you probably noticed I'm wearing my Let It Be t-shirt. I picked this up in New York recently, and there's an amusing story to this, because I was on my way back at the airport going through security, and you know where you go through the metal detector, and it beeped. So I knew I must have had something metal on me, and I think it was probably my belt. So I went through, put the belt on the conveyor belt and walked through again, and there was no beep. And the security lady looked at me and looked at my t-shirt and said, "There will be an answer, let it be," which I thought was very amusing. I think I was smiling for about the next 20 minutes after that happened. So how you doing if you're watching? You're probably not, but anyway. So that was my review of Let It Be. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and see you next time.